It's budget week, and so this week we're having very many financial conversations. Our next financial conversation is about printing money, or something like that, or thereabouts. Tony Mwiti is the director of Hampton Limited and a member of the Modern Monetary Forum. He's our guest for the next hour. Tony, good morning.
Yes, good morning. Thank you for having me here.
Welcome to the hot seat of the Situation Room.
Yes, thank you, sir.
Tony, City will welcome you with the day's proverb, and this week the proverbs are from the Republic
of Zambia. Jump over a log, but not over a neighbor's word.
Jump over a log, but not over a neighbor's word. What's your interpretation of this?
Could that mean it is take your neighbor's word more seriously? Consider your community, your peers, much more seriously.
Okay.
Makes sense.
Perfect sense. Makes perfect sense.
Take your neighbors more seriously. Don't just jump
when
over
people say
their
things,
words.
don't just dismiss what they're saying.
Yes.
That's a good one. So, Tony, what is the Modern Monetary Forum? You'll start with us and then you'll tell us what Hampton does.
Yes, so Modern Monetary Forum is an international group of economists. We're about 1,000 of us in different parts of the world. But the main proponents sit in the US and Australia. And we are all advocating and trying to lobby our governments and our institutions to adopt this MMT setup that I'll be discussing here today. Yes, and so as far as I know in Kenya, perhaps the only one. I haven't met another member. It's voluntary. Anyone can just subscribe and join the group.
How many members does the forum have?
The forum internationally is over 1,000 of us.
Okay.
Yes.
Individual economists.
Individual economists, yes.
Not organizations.
Not organizations.
So the membership is by individuals.
It's just individuals.
What do you advocate?
We're saying governments of sovereign nations can never go broke.
Okay.
We're saying that the government is the source of its own currency.
Okay.
And that the lens nations have been wearing so far is that taxation or taxes are the source of their own currency, which then leads us to have the wrong solutions, because the model in and of itself subscribes that the source to be taxation rather than the source to be the government within its exclusive mandate or power to create the currency.
Okay. Still don't get it. Continue.
Right. I'll tell you this.
So the government prints money. That's what you're saying, right?
Not only,
the,
yes.
the government has its, for example, the Kenyan government and the shilling. The Kenyan government knows how many shillings are in circulation.
Right.
Okay. But then you're saying that the source of wealth for the Kenyan government is we are going to raise money by taxing the individuals and corporates in this country in shillings.
Yes.
What's the issue there?
So that is where we have been wrong. The government is looking for the Kenya shilling, while in itself it is the source of the Kenya shilling. We are going into the market to try and get taxation from the private sector. And we're in a season where we're really talking about taxes right now. And the taxes are insufficient. And thereby the government is taxing us even higher, isn't it? The lens we are wearing is what is wrong. Why would the license holder of an inexhaustible asset go and get that asset from an area where it is exhaustible?
And this inexhaustible item is what exactly?
So this inexhaustible item is this. There cannot have been a Kenya shilling if there was no Kenya government. So pre-independence, there was no Kenya shilling. So the Kenya government could not have gone to tax the Kenyan citizen to try and get the Kenya shilling. There was no Kenya shilling to be able to tax.
But there was a common currency.
There was a common currency, but there was no Kenya shilling.
It was not the Kenyan shilling.
Yes, there was no Kenya shilling. So when we then become a nation and decide to want to be sovereign, we then create a currency, which every nation does. So we have the Kenya shilling. The source of the Kenya shilling can only be the Kenya government. We cannot go to America to borrow the Kenya shilling from them. We can borrow the dollar, convert it to the Kenya shilling, and then utilize it in the Kenya shilling. But there is no other source. The Kenya government is the sole and exclusive license holder of the Kenya shilling.
True.
With that in mind, that tool that you have puts the Kenya government or governments in another dimension other than us who are currency users. You and I are currency users. The government of Kenya is the currency issuer. So they play or should play in a whole different manner. The rules of the game change when they wear the lens that says, wait a minute, we are the government, we are currency issuers.
Yes, you are.
And so if we have a deficiency, and I'll go further and say there are disclaimers to that model. But if you say you have a deficiency, which the Kenya government is saying and has been in a deficient state for quite a while, the idea is then you don't go to the market to look for something that you're the issuer yourself. Why not issue that money and put it on the table?
Okay. So what you're saying essentially is that instead of going to look for more money via way of taxation in the country, that what the government ought to do is print more money.
Create more money, yes. Because it is the issuer.
Okay. So at will, I would assume that there are reasons why the government, any government per se, doesn't just print money at will.
Yes.
Doesn't just print their currency at will
Yes.
when there is a lack.
Yes.
And there are reasons economically as to why that doesn't happen.
Yes.
So in this space whereby you're looking obviously for more money to be able to do many things, run government, pay debt responsibility, make sure that fiscally there is responsibility as well, and make sure that then the responsibility of government is sorted out in different sectors, health, education, infrastructure, etc., etc. That's essentially what you look for money for.
Yes.
And that you do that through taxation. But in the event whereby it is not enough, like what we are seeing now, I am still trying to establish that you're saying what the government needs to do is print more.
Okay. In the area of money printing, inflation is the relevant risk. So by no means am I saying let's print willy-nilly all that we can and use all that we can be able to issue out. No. But what I'm also saying is this: the finances are not, the government is not broke. It's not a financial limitation, it is an inflation limitation. The limit is not money. The limit is what that money can do in the market, either for good or for bad.
So you're suggesting that what that money can do is determined by the supply of that money. How much of it is available in the market?
It is determined by the demand. It is the demand that can avail the resources. So we need to, I'll give you an international story.
All right.
Every year since 1932, American government has openly printed, created, they do it digitally, electronically, but we call it printing for the sake of understanding, has printed about 10% of its annual budget every single year. And it's not doing this in secret. It just doesn't call it printing. They have an economic name for it. But every single year. So what happened in 1932? That's when President Roosevelt came into power. The country was, this was when they had the Great Recession, right? So he came on the back of
The
that.
Great Depression.
Yeah, that was what? The Great Recession, I think. Is it depression? The depression that time.
The
Which year was this?
1930s.
That's
was the Great
depression.
Depression.
That's the depression.
Yes.
And that's how he won his ticket, just like our President Ruto. He came and said, I can fix this economy. Things are going bad, right? Very few, people are working, banks have closed, there's a run on the dollar. He comes on the back of that and says, I can bring change. He's then approached by who then became a famous economist called John Maynard Keynes. His name is probably quoted here. This is how Keynes
came with the Keynesian theory.
This is how Keynes came into the limelight. He said, fine. There are no taxes to collect. We're in a recession, we're in a depression, there's no money to collect. Where is Kenya right now? We're in a situation exactly like that. There are not enough taxes to collect. But yet you have a development agenda as a government, right? So Keynes tell him, don't worry. I'll show you how to do this. You, Mr. Roosevelt, and the government you represent are the currency issuer. We can generate enough money to catalyze the economy. But you need projects in which to be able to fund, right? So don't just print money and put it out in the street. So what did they do? They had a massive infrastructure project. If you go to the US, all those libraries, all the old airports, museums, prisons, art centers, they were built between 1932 and 1945. Why did they build them? So that demand can be what the money satisfies. So they went and employed Americans in large numbers and said, fine, no problem. If you have a job, we shall backstop that job with this newly created money. You understand that?
Mm-hmm.
So they created the demand and then fulfilled the supply of that demand.
Mm-hmm.
Every single year since 1932, that is what they did. America went from the Great Depression, and within 5 years, they were back to superpower status. Mm-hmm. In fact, they came out of it so quickly, they joined the World War and were the main catalyst for that World War being won.
Essentially, what you're saying is that the government decided to be the big spender.
The government should always be the biggest spender. But yes, if you don't understand that you have the tool to be able to catalyze the economy, the government is looking to the citizens to get money from the citizens. What I'm saying is it's actually the opposite way. It's the citizens who need the government's money. What is the government's money? It's the Kenya shilling. And it's the ability to create it in a structured manner that will not cause inflation.
Okay. Is there an end to one and a beginning to the other? So let's say, for instance, you have this structured way of creating the money,
yes,
right? Of generating the money. You put it into those, let's say, earmarked projects that are catalytic, yes, in nature. Once the people then have the demand for the money and they start using this money, then you can say now the next source of government expenditure will come from the taxes, can't you?
Yes. It's very, very, very correct.
So you're not saying that stop taxing.
It'll be a political decision. It'll be a governance decision as to when and where you want to be able to stop this.
Okay, so what are you advocating for right now? Are you saying stop taxes, first of all, flood the market, not flood the market, but put money into the market?
At this point in time, in Kenya's situation,
yeah,
what we're trying to say is these new taxes do not need to come into play,
mm-hmm,
right? We're not saying remove the old taxes. At least at this point, I'm saying these new taxes that are causing, uproar through the country do not need to come into play.
So don't raise taxes.
Don't raise taxes.
Generate more money.
Generate more money from your own capacity to be able to print that money, utilize that to catalyze the economy.
How do you balance that with inflation?
So it is a matter of how much money will cause inflation. What kind of projects do you need to put in place that, if funded, will not cause inflation? Now, so all this can be done pre-disbursement, is what also we're advocating for. Don't do this post-disbursement. Do this pre-disbursement. We've got very intelligent people at the Central Bank, at the Treasury, at the Budget Parliamentary Office, at KRA. This framework can be established.
Okay.
How much is too much?
Let's go practically,
yes,
right? The Monetary Policy Committee of the Central Bank has been meeting and has been looking at the inflation rate in the country and been looking at all those and maintaining the rate, the central bank rate, at a certain point.
Yeah.
What are they doing? They are doing that so that they can curtail inflation, right? Yeah. So what are you saying today? Are you saying that they should just add more money into this mix? Are you saying that the government should look at, okay, we collected 2 trillion, we are collecting 2.2 trillion shillings this year, we can just still budget the 2.2 trillion shillings next year, not increase any more tax, and print more money? What exactly are you saying?
So it's about targeting, right? It's about targeting. If you were to be able to spend in an area that will not cause inflation, then spend on it. If you are going to spend in an area that was going to cause inflation, don't spend on it.
Example?
It's about targeting. So a practical example is this. Currently, the biggest cause of inflation is the cost of fuel. Mm-hmm. Right? That would be the largest source. You saw when the prices were escalating, inflation continued with it. There might be other, minor areas, but that's the main source currently, right? Behind the price of fuel is about an 89 shilling tax. What if you were to be able to say, fine, government, why go after that 89 shilling in the private sector? Well, let's deduct that 89 shilling from the cost of fuel, because that's purely a government cost, right? It's not an importation cost. It's got nothing to do with the dollar. It's 89 shillings added by the government. If you're to go and say, fine, let's knock off that 89 shillings, but let's replace it in its use in the government through money printing, money creation. What will that do? It'll knock off 89 shillings from the price of fuel today, but yet still facilitate all the development needs that the government has. So they don't have to come to us for the 89 shillings.
So where will they get the money?
They'll get the money by printing the 89 shillings.
So they can print the money for railway development. They can print the money for road maintenance and all those earmarked, like you're saying.
Yes.
So it's about earmark. How much money do you need for road maintenance in this next financial year? We need, say, 60 billion shillings. So print 60 billion shillings. Don't collect it from us, guys, but have it and put it into the market.
Yes. So what does that do to inflation as it is? So it's not only money printing that causes inflation. Inflation comes, via, myriad of reasons.
Right.
A variety of reasons cause inflation. We can even knock off inflation by money creation rather than increase inflation by money creation.
Oh, okay. And so the assumption is that this money that will be printed, that is actually going to be used for this thing that it said it's going to be used for.
Of course, that is then the assumption, right? That yes, they use it for what they're saying.
So that they say the 89 shillings per litre of fuel that is currently in tax is going to go towards three things. For example, infrastructure, for example. So infrastructure, under all that, roads, all kinds of things. And what else does it go to right now?
School feeding program.
It goes into all these programs.
Everything.
So there's what's earmarked for
under that
specific
89
projects.
shillings. Yeah.
And then there's what, like VAT and the others that goes into the big kitty that services other services.
So we are saying that we would, if we would suddenly divorce from the current MO, right? And that this 89 shillings, if it was printed, would actually go to making sure that all of those things worked.
Yes. You're guaranteeing now that those projects can happen.
That those projects will happen.
Yes.
What if we didn't divorce from the way things currently happen and that this money was printed and it disappeared into thin air? What would happen?
So, who says they're not doing that right now?
This is exactly what I'm saying. We didn't divorce from the current MO.
So, the government is supposed to, we're taking this as they're supposed to do what's right. Right? So that's going to always be the assumption that they will do what's right with the money. So even now that this is not yet a legal framework, it is possible that they could be abusing that system behind the scenes, and we will never know, right? So why not even why not even mainstream it? So that now it's actually considered as a source of revenue. Now, the various auditor generals and so on and so forth can be able to trace it and track it. They can be able to red flag it whenever this and the other happens.
They red flag things that are not happening now, Tony. They're red flagging things that are not happening now. They've been red flagging for the last 1 year, and here we are still sitting on perhaps maybe it's red flagged and it's just makes a splash, and nothing happens after.
But that's a moral question. That's not necessarily because they were printing or not. That's a moral question. The kind of leadership.
But how do we know that we actually haven't been printing?
There was a clip that was going around on social media a couple of days ago of this girl who says, okay, I don't understand this thing.
I saw it.
Government is saying it's broke. Government is paying debt. So your government is raising taxes. Why can't government just print money and pay debt?
Print and give them.
Simple.
Print pesa, papaleka China, Malaysia deni. What's this whole issue?
Surely. How do we know that we haven't been printing money anyway? After all, we just print it here in Rwanda.
But we must be printing money anyway.
We do print it. That's why we have new notes. But who says that we haven't been just printing it? You see, the discussion around money is the discussion around value. Now, there used to be something called a gold standard, which was abundant after the depression of 1930s, meaning whatever currency one spoke of had to equal the value of the gold that they had. They realized this thing is not working very well. So that's when we introduced this fiduciary issue that we have. And the reason why these notes work, the reason why we have them is not because they have value. The value is trust.
Yes.
You can talk about what it can buy, but it's essentially trust. That is why they work. That is actually the gold standard that we use for these currencies that we use around. Now, when someone says you print more, I understand what is being said, and I understand that it even makes sense up to a certain point. But Kenya has a unique situation.
What's that?
You see, it isn't as though we don't have money circulating in the country. It's that the circulation of money isn't, let me put it simply, it's not that you print money and then you distribute it to people. No. Money is supposed to go into things activities that create value. And the understanding is that creates what we call employment. Employment creates a situation where people get paid, etc., etc., etc. So circulation of money has to be money in people's hands, and the value is what else we do with it. Now, here in Kenya, we have a unique problem, as I started off with. The unique problem is that every time you hear of a project which is supposed to bring about what I've just said, you expect the complete opposite to happen, because the money doesn't really go to what it's intended for.
That's not unique to Kenya, though.
Well, it's Kenya that I have great experience with, so it has to be my reference point.
Do you, like ordinary citizens, know at any point how much money is in circulation?
Unless you bother to read about it, you won't.
Okay.
Yes.
So it's not that, an everyday thing that you're holding because it's written, this is a serial number, now that we have X number of notes out or shillings out in the market. So there are people who know.
Yes.
There are people in the central bank who know how much money is in circulation,
yes,
how much more they are printing, and all those things at the central bank and in the national treasury, right?
Yes. Yes.
What determines their decision? What determines the decision to either allow money to circulate, to hold back money, to print more?
Eric, can I go just slightly back before we get to your point, if I may? You see, there's this little matter of that money being available, okay? Through the manner in which I mentioned, but also through processes where you can actually borrow. Government policy can make it easier for you to borrow. And sometimes the very thing, now going back to what you're saying, those policies can make it difficult for you to borrow. Yes. So if you can't access the money as an individual, then at an individual level, the circulation will be limited simply because I cannot access it.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, or accessing it becomes difficult. So then comes to your point, and then we ask the question, the thinking behind these decisions that bring about this. Yes.
The decisions on how much money is floating around in the economy. Well, it's a central bank. It's a central bank issue.
What do they base it on?
And largely, it's for ease of trade, right? So there's supposed to be enough currency circulating so that there's ease of trade. That's
what we see here, because what they seem to do, we seem to see trade being restricted and constricted. In fact, almost strangle-held or hold, because those policies, as you say, are supposed to make business flow easy. But does it happen in this country?
Not quite, isn't it?
Yes.
Yes. And those are the major concerns as a nation we have. And for us MMT economists, and that's why we're coming up with some of these new, more radical alternative solutions, is trying to say there is a cog in the middle of the framework that is missing. Like those, puzzles that you play with. There is an essential piece missing. And when that piece is missing, the whole building doesn't stand very
What pieces is that missing, Tony?
It is the understanding that the government doesn't have to go anywhere to look for the Kenya shilling. The government has no financial constraint. It has an inflation restraint. The government can inject liquidity at will.
But it does that.
No, it doesn't. It only passes in that which it has collected from you. It only reinvests that which it has collected in taxes. So when the economy is bad as it is now, the government then says, we don't have enough money. We are seeing salary delays. We're seeing county revenue delays, 3, 4, 5 months. And this has been happening for at least 2 years because there's not enough to collect. The government does not have to rely on collection. It is the issuer of the currency.
But there's
As
several
long
things
as
here,
it
Tony.
creates money in a non-inflationary manner, it can inject liquidity into the market and catalyze the economy.
But it does inject liquidity into the market.
From money acquired from taxes or debt?
Both.
No, I'm saying it is. That's the only
Right.
sources that it's a.
And in some instances, maybe by controlling and printing fresh currency. Maybe.
It is not a policy for sure. If they are currently printing in the sense of printing to inject it as an investment, then it's not policy.
So what are you saying is that go ahead and print. If you don't have money to pay salaries at the end of this month, print the money to pay salaries.
If you're doing it as a stopgap measure, yes, you can easily say, fine, for salaries, let's do this. But I'm advocating for a framework that utilizes money printing as one of the revenue streams.
How regular would this be?
It's a governance and political question to answer. It is as we need as a nation. So it has no necessary end. The end is determined by the demand, by what is happening in the economy. It could be 6 months, it could be 2 years.
Let's say this happens. Money is printed. Theoretically speaking, how many billions would you need to print? Just for purpose of a discussion, yes.
So at this point in time, if I was in another hot seat like this hot seat I'm sitting on,
Yes.
perhaps somewhere in Treasury or somewhere there, I would be looking at a national job guarantee program.
Okay. How much would this cost?
Employment is high.
So hire
Companies are
people into
retrenching.
government.
Hire people into government. Mop up the loose unemployment. Create employment. So we can then do the calculation.
So you print money so that you can pay people.
Salaries.
Yes.
Yes. Our bill right now, we're told, is 1 billion shillings. Is that not so?
Trillion.
Trillion.
That is what we billion for paying salaries.
Yes.
Yes.
But that's
what?
current.
That is why CS Moses Kuria was up in arms and saying it's not possible that we can keep this money.
1 trillion shillings is what we use to pay.
Yes.
So all these people get paid.
Yes.
Then why does the government have a problem raising money?
So let's go to the unemployment. We have about 3 million
So
unemployed.
you recruit these people into government.
Yes.
Okay, go on.
These are, and most likely it'll be entry level types of jobs. Right?
Okay.
If we had a calculator, they would calculate maybe entry level could be about 50,000 shillings. I
Okay.
think that's what entry level for military is. So 3 million people times that 50,000. That's how I would go about it. Now, in order to avoid inflation at that level, you'd still stagger that in. I wouldn't employ 3 million people today. But I would have the target of 3 million and start perhaps with 500,000 every 3 months or so. It's because suddenly if you have all that money hitting the economy, then all these people are buying bread, milk, sugar. That's then what causes inflation, you see? That sudden high demand. But you can still scale it in. Remember what I said, we don't have a financial problem as a government. Inflation is the risk. Mm-hmm. So the government can employ all the unemployed people as long as that's not inflationary.
Okay.
And you can scale it in
Okay.
over perhaps 1 year.
The government employing all of these people with this money, essentially what you're saying is that then this money that is printed essentially goes towards paying people,
salaries.
but it's paying salaries in drips. It's not just one time it going out and giving it to everybody. However, how would you curtail that? Because these individuals, because they're individuals, they're not entities, individuals that you're paying essentially are still going back into the market to spend this that you've paid to them.
And so that's what I'm saying. What you do in a national job guarantee program, you don't employ the 3 million at once.
Okay.
You can guarantee that you're going to employ them, but then January to March, 500,000 employed. So these are the ones earning. January to March, this first cohort of 500,000 are earning. March to another month, the next 500,000. So you scale it in, right? So that by the end of the year, or even by the end of 2 years, you've mopped up that unemployment. And then you have drivers, cooks, security guards, so on and so forth. You can even second people to the private sector.
So long as it's not inflationary.
As long as it's not inflationary.
What is inflation?
Too few goods.
No, it's too much money.
Too much money chasing
after few
too
goods.
few goods.
Okay, how would that happen?
So if you, for example, employed all the 3 million people today, and let's say that by the end of the month, they're all buying a packet of bread.
You're paying each of them 50,000
shillings. Every day, each of those 3 million people buy a packet of bread and a loaf of bread and a packet of milk, right? So suddenly you have a need for 3 million loaves of bread every single day.
Right.
The supply chain was not ready for that demand. Right. So the supply chain might be in place. It's not ready for that.
It's not optimized for this.
So suddenly bread starts becoming a very valued commodity, right? So now when you go to the supermarket or all the supermarkets, there's an extra 3 million people coming for that bread. What will the supermarket do? Say, hey, this is the new ticket out of this.
bob.
Another 50 shillings on top of the loaf of bread. Oh, still there's more demand. Another 200 shillings on top of that loaf of bread. So that sudden demand is what can cause inflation.
Okay.
So you would scale it in. So again, it's not a financial problem that we have.
Okay.
Inflation is the relevant risk. Inflation is what you're trying not to have.
Okay. How would that preclude you then from inviting the idea of higher taxation?
I would not see why the government would want to increase taxation in a situation where they are printing the money that they would have then been collecting in taxes. Why would they need?
So by hiring, by
additional
the National Employment Guarantee, what you're doing is that you're hiring people who you're going to tax anyway.
Yes.
Right? And so they're paying these taxes, so you would not need to then bring about taxes. However, you're not hiring everybody in the country.
For me, actually, in the MMT lens that I wear, taxation is not even for raising revenue. It has its other purposes, but really, it's not for raising revenue.
Like what?
To me, it's an inflationary control. So at the back end, remember you did your pre-disbursement anti-inflation analysis before you went and printed and hired all these people, right? But on the back end, things only sometimes go a little wrong, isn't it? So if you see a little inflation happening, perhaps in the area of bread, you could then go and say to the bread factory, we're increasing taxes in that area. Why are you increasing taxes? So that you can have economic control. When you increase then the cost of bread, then what you're hoping to do is that the demand comes a little lower, because then you don't have you don't have too many people chasing after that bread. So to me, at the back end, taxes are more of a back end economic control. But all that doesn't have to happen at the beginning, right? This is in the full picture. This is if we were to go about this 3-4 years down the lane, there's enough advocacy, there's enough information getting out there. I'm talking about Kenya today.
Okay.
And these new taxes that are coming in today.
That's a good question. Now that you've grounded that, we're talking about Kenya today. Why do you think these new taxes are being introduced in Kenya today? For what purpose? Why? What do you think? All of them go through digitax, eco tax, motor vehicle insurance tax, money transfer tax, tax on bread, VAT on what is it? There's VAT. I mean, it just goes on and on and on. Why do you think those are being introduced today in Kenya?
The government has a huge hole. It's in deficit. Deficit in the sense of the loans we're paying, deficit in its own recurrent expenditure. So what is it doing? It's come up with a number of taxes so that it can fill that deficit. A lot of that money, according to me, will not be going to what they're saying it'll be going to. In the sense, if you're saying it's an eco-tax, will it be going into the environment, into the ecology? I don't think so. It'll be going to recurrent expenditure in one form or the other. It'll be going to paying back taxes in one form or the other. So they're doing this huge spread so that I get a little here, a little there, a little this, a little that, and then fill up the coffers. And then now they're able to run the government. That's really where this is coming from. So it's that hole, that gap that they're trying to fill. And perhaps they're looking into the future, saying, we need to live out this 5-year term, and so we need to set things in motion so that 3-4 years from now, we're still having the right momentum. The government will not be able to collect that money because you and I will not be able to generate enough of that money in the economy. Factories are closing, jobs are being lost. Nation Media Group last week announced retrenchment. Last year it did another retrenchment. It's not going to happen.
The American economy that you quoted earlier on, when you look at the stock market crash of 29 is what led to that depression anyway. Remember, for that to have happened, it meant private entities and businesses, the country was awash with it. And that is the reason why one could actually sell stocks at the shocks. The shock came
Stock
around.
was sold too.
Yes, to the public. And that is why there could be a demand for it. But remember also, part of the problem that crash, that brought about that crash, was speculation. The economy was doing swimmingly. 2019, 20, 2020. It was doing well, and people figured this is a good way of investing money.
Yes.
All right? Now, we are nowhere near where America was in 1921 or 1920. Because the growth that came about that led to that problem is what enabled what you're saying to actually make sense. Because if the economy already has investment, it already has factories there, it already has commercial enterprise that are making money. When you say you're printing money, you know where it's going to go. In our case, where does it go? Because if you have the few industries that we have threatening to close, some already closing.
Even without the printing, where
Yes.
is the money that is being collected
That is generated.
from taxes today?
Yes.
Why is there there's no clear path in terms of where it has gone? There continues to be issues today that we speak of money that has been borrowed, which should be constitutionally only for development,
Yes.
and you cannot trace a line clear from that money which was borrowed and the supposed development which is
Yes.
supposed to have happened.
Yeah.
And so here we are imagining a situation whereby we can create more, right? Whereby you do not even know what is presently available where it's going. And we're placing that responsibility on the same government to then be able to make sure, I will say, okay, actually, you know what? Any other behavior that had happened, let's put that aside, but we're going to print money and we're going to ensure that it's going to go into the same place. And I'm saying the atmosphere, unfortunately, is not prepped for that.
Our reality is an interesting one. Remember, this talk that you now have, we're not new to it. There are those who are speculative and those who suggest that we have printed money in the past. We did print money in the days of YK.
92.
Yes, that money was printed. If we had a reliable government, if we had a reliable parliament because of oversight, then the things you're saying have a chance of actually not just making sense, but of actually working. But if money that have been borrowed, as Ndu has mentioned, for development, doesn't go into the development for which is intended, and yet we are burdened with the tax, or rather with the debt that we must pay, and yet indeed, if the money had gone to the development for which it was intended, the very thing you're saying would have happened. The economy would have had an injection of money that would have helped this process of growth. That didn't happen. And it didn't happen on very many occasions. It isn't a one-off.
So it's an expenditure issue,
Yes.
not really a revenue and revenue raising issue. It's an expenditure issue. Would it be resolved the same way if we approached it? And so the government is seeking to raise revenue so that it can feed this monster of an expenditure. If you were to address it from an expenditure side and say, how much can we either reduce expenditure? How much can we manage this expenditure? Would we need to go the route that you're saying?
Unfortunately or fortunately, we are relying on government data even to make these decisions and to make these arguments, right? So we know where the money should go, but that, the money is not necessarily going where it needed to have gone. So where we find ourselves is that we need to come up with creative solutions based on the information they're giving us. Whether the information is 100% correct, whether there are ghosts behind those stories. Unfortunately, that is where we are. So if they're the ones telling us that we do not have enough money and thereby we're coming after you in the form of taxes, then I'm responding back to them and saying, then why don't you use this method? And actually, to me, from where I'm seated, I would rather even they created that same amount and misused it the way we are supposing they're misusing it, because at least to some extent they've not taken my hard-earned money, which then I'm using to feed my children, take them to school. In a situation of money printing, money creation, if the money is stolen, whose money has been lost? Is it the taxpayers' money that has been lost? Nothing. It is not your money that has been lost. It is the money that is created that has been stolen, that has been lost. And what could that do as moving forward? Moving forward, it can cause inflation. Remember I said inflation then is the relevant risk. They could still steal it to in small doses where it misappropriated in small doses to where we do not find it doesn't occasion inflation. That could happen.
Why don't governments do this?
So, maybe to your surprise, almost all the Western nations do this every single year.
To what percentage of their?
So when you hear Japan has the highest debt to GDP ratio, you've probably talked about it here. It's because Japan is creating its own currency. So this is how it works there at the economic, at the financial level. They don't call it printing. They call it something called deficit funding. If you search deficit funding, there's lots of stories.
Yeah.
So the government creates, the US government creates $1 million. Rather than saying we have invested that $1 million into the economy, they go to the Federal Reserve and say minus $1 million. That we owe as the government, we owe you, Federal Reserve.
Or the Federal Reserve $1 million.
$1 million. But that money was not money the Federal Reserve had in reserve. That was money the Federal Reserve created. So when you hear Japan has debt to GDP, it is because it's in their own currency. They have deficit funded, borrowed from their money creation capacity.
And from their savings.
Is there a threshold? Is there a limit? Is there a maximum that if you go beyond this, then you're basically just blowing up your economy?
There's no one limit. It'll depend on each economy and its uniqueness, its peculiarities.
Okay.
There's no particular figure.
Okay.
Right? And
So
even
why
every year on year, the figure created might not be the
Why
same.
are African countries not doing it?
So here we are advocating for it. It's a knowledge issue. The Bible says people perish for
Are
lack
you
of
saying that
knowledge.
it's because they don't know? All the finance ministers and central bank governors of Africa do not know that this is happening elsewhere?
I'm not sure. I actually believe the CBK people know. But the politicians who create the policies do not know.
So why can't the CBK people tell them?
So as it is, just even to make this a little more interesting, we actually do this in something called CBK, what is it called? When the bank give overdraft.
Yeah.
So when you go to the Kenyan CBK Treasury analysis, you'll see overdraft. The overdraft the current CBK gives to the Kenyan government
The creation
is
of...
creation. But it has a limit up to 5%, but Kenya government has to pay it back. So already there's a little space. So actually for me, that would be the space I expand on
Okay.
if we need to.
Tony Mwiti has been our guest, Director Clark Hampton, and a member of the Modern Monetary Forum. Is a global forum of economists who are advocating for structured money printing.
This is the Situation Room, the only way to start your day.